Hello there, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. Coming up today, a rise in violence among Scotland's teenagers has left 3 young men dead in the past year and led to calls for serious and immediate action. So what's happening? And should we have seen this coming as a generation of young people emerge from the difficult years of lockdown? Tim Frew will join us. He runs YouthLink Scotland. They speak for the country's youth workers, so he's well placed to understand the problems our young people face. And the Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, will be with me in the studio too. Her government's been accused of fueling this problem by cutting police numbers, going soft on discipline and more. Are those accusations fair? I'll ask her. And the Scottish summer is here at last, with strong winds and rain showers sweeping much of the country. It all brings a sense of disappointment to many of us, but not to Alex Plant. He's the head of Scottish Water, and he's going to join me to discuss how badly we need the coming downpours and what plans his teams are making to cope with a hotter, drier future. After that, it is over to Lucy White on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Hi, Lucy.
Morning, Martin. We're going to keep the conversation going on knives. We'll speak to one man who grew up in gangs in Glasgow and now campaigns against youth violence. We're expecting a 5-year forecast for Scotland's finances this week. We'll ask what kind of shape they're in, and we'll be in Aberdeen, where the party continues after yesterday's Scottish Cup win.
Yeah, what a moment it is for the Dandy Dons. Thanks, Lucy. More from Lucy at 10:30 on the radio. Right, let's get on with the show. Yeah, good to have you with us. If you want to join the conversation throughout the morning, by the way, the hashtag on social media is BBC Sunday Show. Now, we've heard the pleas over the past few days, police chiefs, parents, politicians, all imploring Scotland's youngsters not to carry knives. Violent crime in this country is lower, far lower than it used to be. But over the past few years, there has been a fairly obvious and troubling uptick in the level of violence amongst youngsters. A 600% increase in serious assaults by teenagers over the past 5 years, and an almost 300% rise in violence in schools over that same time. So what is going on and what's to be done about it? Well, Tim Frew is the Chief Executive of YouthLink Scotland, who describe themselves as the collective voice of the youth work sector here. They also run the No Knives, Better Lives campaign in conjunction with the Scottish Government. Morning, Tim.
Good morning.
We are, as discussed, a far less violent country than we used to be, but the youth violence stats recently have been quite troubling. They've certainly had very tragic consequences. Why is it happening?
So I think there's a number of interrelated factors that are affecting our children and young people at the moment. I would say that social media has a component to this as well, in terms of the social media harms that young people are experiencing. But coming out of the pandemic, I think if you speak to any teacher or youth worker, there has been a period of a number of transitional supports for children and young people that maybe weren't in place in the same way during that period, where some of the services were cut off. So it's really important that we understand why young people are feeling unsafe. It's overall, as you said at the intro there, this is actually a very safe country. There's no need for young people to carry knives. If they are carrying knives, they're putting themselves and other young people at harm. So overall, the picture is one where we've worked really hard with the Violence Reduction Unit, have done great work in this area around with No Knives, Better Lives. And it is very much a safe country. And other countries have looked to us for the model of how we have worked with young people over many years in this area.
And yet, the stats are going fairly aggressively over the past few years in the wrong direction. When you talk about support services, what do you mean by that? What's not there that used to be there and should be there?
So I think, very much about youth workers, schools, public health officials, many people, there needs to be a wraparound approach to working with children and young people. Maybe what's not there is the number of the services that we need in terms of community-based services, so that there are diversionary activities and opportunities for children and young people. So we've noticed recently that in our survey of youth work that over the last 8 years there's been a 50% reduction of local authority youth workers. In terms of the voluntary sector, it's really under pressure as well. National insurance contribution increases, and the number of volunteers overall is not where it was pre-pandemic. So despite the best efforts of the youth work sector, working with many others, some of those support services, some of those youth clubs and activities, those safe spaces for children and young people, are not at the volume that they were a few years ago.
I can hear people thinking, though, at the moment, what's the correlation between somebody being bored and that person stabbing somebody? There should be an enormous distance between those two things, should there not?
Well, absolutely. We need, you know, there is a distance between that. But I think the kind of the triggers, the ways that young people can, their peer groups, how they can start to drift into these things is where we want to kind of nip things in the bud in terms of those opportunities. So No Knives, Better Lives, we train practitioners. We also train peer educators, as do Mentors Against Violence, Medics Against Violence, so that young people themselves can talk to other young people in the language that they understand, to kind of sort of demystify some of the things where they think, oh, it's okay, this is kind of a cool thing to do, or I feel safer with a knife. It's just not the case that you're going to be safer with a knife. So we need to kind of understand with young people why these things are happening, and why they feel unsafe. You know, a recent Young Scot survey showed that 2/3 of young people felt unsafe at some time in public spaces, and we need to kind of get into that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I mean, what possesses a kid? It's a big moment as a child if you put a knife into your jacket pocket before you walk out of the house. And that's because they feel unsafe, is it? That's the reason they would give you?
I think for some young people it might be that. For other young people it might be a sense of that this is the thing to do. It could be a false sense of machoism or whatever. We've done some work, the Imagine a Man project, which was trying to tackle this toxic masculinity that's coming through social media and other places, and look at what does positive masculinity mean? What is it to be a good man? How do we kind of demystify some notion, you know, strange notions around carrying knives, and why that wouldn't be helpful and wouldn't be clever. Some of the projects in terms of youth work, though, when we have those youth work opportunities and projects, Peak as an example in Glasgow, working with Govan High School, they managed to reduce police interventions by 82%, and school demerits, which is school discipline and indiscipline, was reduced as well by working along with youth workers. So having a trusted adult who isn't maybe giving you, you know, school has a role to play, but it can't all happen in school. In other places and spaces, we can have that conversation to try and demystify some of it.
And so there's a direct correlation between these, you would argue, between these projects shutting down and some of what we're seeing now, right?
So that's certainly what we're seeing in other countries and have seen before. So in England, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Knife Crime made a link between the erosion of youth and community services and the rise in kind of violence and knife crime. A Children and Young People report looked at that as well, Children and Young People Now in 2020. And also the independent report on antisocial behaviour made that link as well, to say, you know, we need to ring fence youth work funding and youth work spaces. We need to protect sort of projects and diversionary projects for children and young people. One of the challenges at the moment is that the budget, when the budget is squeezed, and you know, it's youth work is not, and not just youth work, but other services in the community. It seems to be that's the thing that gets cut first in terms of grassroots projects. Right,
we've got Angela Constance, the Justice Secretary, coming on next. It's she and her cabinet colleagues who decide on these budgets. What would you say to her?
I would say that, you know, we welcome what the First Minister said on Wednesday about working with the sector to understand what's behind some of this issue. I would also say, in terms of, we recognise the cross-party support there is for youth work. However, it's quite a weak statutory basis that youth work's sitting on at the moment. So it's a service that tends to get squeezed. We have the CLD independent report on CLD in terms of adult learning and youth work. And it talks there about having an entitlement to youth work services as a kind of a right for children and young people to have access to these spaces and places. And what I'd say is, my experience is that this was happening pre-pandemic in 2019, that there's been a bit of too many services that have been cut, and we need to kind of restore some of those projects.
How urgent is this, briefly?
I think it's very urgent, actually, in terms of growing the sector, because the demands on youth work in terms of mental health and well-being, closing the poverty-related attainment gap, all these things are really significant, and child poverty. So yeah, we need to do more for the children and young people who've come through this. You know, I've given evidence to the COVID inquiry. Youth work pivoted very well during that period, and it was agile to meet the needs of young people. It's agile, but it's also fragile as a sector. So yeah, we need to kind of work together on that.
All right, Tim, thank you. Tim Frew from Youth Link Scotland, thank you very much indeed for your time this Sunday morning. Thank you. So it is a multifaceted, complex problem, but as we've been hearing, much of the solution does lie in funding. More of it, and quickly, we've just heard. But how does that happen in a world where every pound seems to be a prisoner at government level, not just here, but all over the place? Tragically, there are families out there this morning who'll be saying budgets just don't come into this. It is a matter of life and death. Well, Angela Constance is the Justice Secretary. She is just taking a seat beside me. I think you've settled in. Good morning, Angela Constance.
Good morning, Martin.
Do you accept that there is a direct link between cuts to youth services and a rise in violent crime?
So I accept in terms of the response to violent crime that requires it's two-pronged. It's about prevention and it's also about tackling and responding. So it isn't just about enforcement. Enforcement is obviously important to me as the Justice Secretary, but it is imperative that as a government that we continue to prioritise public services, whether that's education, whether it's health, whether it's policing, and also support the third sector in prevention. And I am a huge advocate for the power of youth work. In times of austerity, you do see that pressure between statutory services and the funding required for legally binding services and the third sector. But as a government, we've continued to increase investment in public services, but also to try...
a 50% reduction in youth workers, we've just heard.
So one of the things that is important that the Social Justice Secretary, for example, has been working on and has been delivering is to improve longer-term funding for the third sector. Scottish Government funds organisations such as Youth Link Scotland, who are leaders in this sector.
But you've cut youth services by £11 million.
So it's not actually the Scottish Government who runs youth services, but we have in a recent budget increased funding for health, policing and also local government. And I think that is imperative that we see that investment across public services. But it is important in acknowledging that despite the progress that's been made in the past 15 years or so to make Scotland safer, that there is a change for some young people. The majority of young people are law-abiding. So we do need to redouble our efforts, and that's why I'm really pleased that I'll be chairing a follow-up summit from the Youth Violence Summit that First Minister led to really focus on youth work.
I mean, summits and all that are all very good, but as I said in the introduction, there'll be families out there for whom it is already too late. Just back to the original question I asked you, do you accept there is a direct link between cuts to youth services and a rise in violent crime?
So I think the rise in violent crime amongst young people is complex. There's not one reason, there will be many, and that means there will be more than one solution. But let me be...
This is part of it, right?
It absolutely is, and let me be absolutely clear about that, Martin. The contribution that youth work currently makes in this country and could make will be imperative going forward. It's a key part of the solution.
Why is violence in our schools up so sharply, up almost 300% since the year before lockdown?
So we did begin to see changes around 2019-20 and it is important that changes in behaviour in school and in our communities, that change is acknowledged, that we don't, avoid that or try and bury that. It needs to be acknowledged because it needs to be addressed. Cabinet Secretary for Education talks about the importance of attendance at school, behaviour in school, and the importance of the curriculum in terms of content, in terms of how we engage and educate young people. And
yet we hear the most awful. I've just been reading some of this stuff yesterday. Reports of primary school teachers being hauled to the ground by the hair, throttled with their scarves, fellow pupils begging that violent children aren't let back into classes, but they are. And all too often they all say nothing is happening.
Well, of course, exclusion does remain an option for schools, but we also have to remember that children don't learn and children don't change if they're absent from schools or if they are not cited by services. And school is often a safer place for many children, and our education partners are key in terms of referring children to social services or indeed raising matters with the police. So that multidisciplinary partnership working across our services is important, and that partnership working is as important as investment. Not that I would demur one moment from the importance of pounds, shillings and pence.
Yeah, I mean, you don't think then we're too soft on our kids? Because there is an argument that if you bring back some proper discipline and it worked in the old days and all that kind of stuff, you wouldn't agree with that?
Martin, see when we look at what has changed in the lives of young people, it's really important that we don't focus on the arguments of the past or approaches of the past that have not worked. So some of the rhetoric around discipline, around being tough, that we need a tougher justice system, I would suggest is misplaced. What families want is interventions that work, and the earlier interventions they made. better? Well, of course, we've had more than a decade of austerity. We've had a cost of living crisis, not of the Scottish Government's making.
Sure,
and in the same way, but in the same way,
prioritise your budget.
Yeah,
don't
we
you?
do. We do, and we can prioritise decisions within our budget. Controlling the overall budget, of course, is another matter because decisions rest elsewhere in Westminster. But in terms of the resources that we have, that's why we've focused on health. It's why we've focused on tackling child poverty. It's why the police budget has increased by 90 million for this financial year. So we are focusing on the priorities of prevention and public protection.
I mean, the police say they're in a terrible state at the moment. There's a mental health crisis going on. There's some stats, I think 50% increase in the number of police off work with mental health issues in the past 5 years. Here's my question, right? If we're not being too soft on the kids, there's no stick being used. If we're not providing the youth services that they need, there's no carrot being used. So if there's no carrot and there's no stick, how do we expect anything to change? Well,
of course, there needs to always be consequences for people's actions, and if people break the law, it's for our independent agencies, whether that's the children's hearing system or the courts, to decide on the best course of action. But it's also about the right interventions at the right time. We do have to continue to focus on prevention, and we have a good record on focusing on prevention. Yes, of course, it's been impacted by the pandemic, Westminster's cost of living crisis, and a decade of austerity, which has increased inequality, not just in Scotland but across the UK. So that's why the Scottish Government's focus on public services, protecting the public and tackling child poverty is important.
Here's a quote from Youth Scotland. Research shows investing in youth work leads to a significant reduction in mental health issues, offending, substance abuse. It also increases educational attainment and leads to increased earnings later on in life. It amounts to a contribution of at least £656 million every year to the Scottish economy. That's a return of £7 for every £1 invested in youth work. Do you disagree with any of that? Does that make sense to you?
I agree with every word of that. It makes crystal clear sense to me, and I agree with every word of it.
So we're being offered a 700% interest rate and we've withdrawn £11 million worth of funding.
And that's why I'm very pleased to be convening a follow-up to the Youth Violence Summit that was held by the First Minister earlier this year. We will gather all the party spokespeople, leaders, and also the leaders. We're very blessed in Scotland that we have excellent youth work leaders in this country, that we have world-renowned experts in violence protection, and we now need to build on what has worked in the past, but to ensure that our endeavour is fit for the future.
We always seem to be talking about talking and summits and all that kind of stuff. It just needs cheques to be signed, doesn't it?
Well, and we have record investment.
But you've withdrawn £11 million of funding.
We have record investment in health. There is an additional £1 billion to local government. Investment in policing is up. So we are investing in these crucial public services.
We saw in the council budgets this week
but it's
that
also,
money's disappearing.
And it's also what you do with that money. So it's also the choices about how you allocate resources, as well as policy and practice.
Well, at council level?
Well, at all tiers of government. So all tiers of government will make decisions around resources, but it's about how those are deployed as well.
So have you made the wrong decisions then in removing £11 million worth of funding from this really vital area?
I think I've been very candid, Martin, and acknowledged the pressures on public finance. That despite the pressures on public finance, more than a decade of Westminster austerity and a crazy cost of living crisis that has put more households into poverty and has put additional stress on public services, not to say the tax and jobs through the employers' national insurance contributions hikes, which will have a big effect not just on public services but also in the third sector. But despite that, our priorities continue to be investing in public services and to be thoroughly focused on prevention, and that includes youth work.
All right. Angela, Constance, thank you very much indeed. It's a really difficult subject. Nobody said it was going to be easy, but thank you very much indeed for coming in to discuss it with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, look, if you enjoy the Sunday show, and for goodness sake, why wouldn't you be? I hope you might enjoy Scottcast. It is our daily news and current affairs podcast, hosted by me, and bringing you a bit more insight and understanding of some of the more interesting stories of the week. This week, we spoke to Karen McCluskey about this very issue. She, you may know, was behind the knife amnesty here in Scotland in 2006.
A little bit like whack-a-mole. You know, you press something down, you do all the education, you do all the things that we know work, and then suddenly, in a way, you take your eye off the ball.
Yeah, so loads more of that on Scottcast. It's with you Monday to Thursday on your tellies and on the iPlayer, and of course, all episodes available on BBC Sounds. There's loads of good stuff in there, 70-odd episodes so far. Have a look through. They're all worth a listen, but I would say that, wouldn't I? Right, it's a bank holiday weekend, so the rain is here. Disappointing for many of us, perhaps, but farmers will be delighted, and so will my next guest. Alex Plant is the CEO of Scottish Water. It's his job to work out how we best use this most precious of resources and how we plan for a future where droughts and floods will become ever more of a threat. Scottish Water launched a big consultation exercise on all of this at the start of the year, asking the public for their thoughts. They're just about to publish the results, so let's find out what they might tell us. Alex Plant, good morning.
Good morning, Martin. Good
to see you. I saw the smile on your face when we stood at the window just over there about half an hour ago and looked at the rain battering down. You're happy, are you?
We do need some rain. We've just come out of the driest spring that Scotland's seen since 1964. So when we have that kind of period of long dry weather, that causes real problems because our reservoir levels drop and we actually tend to see demand increasing as well. And those two things together can cause real problems.
Right, I mean, you're looking to medium to long term, but how dramatically and how quickly is our climate likely to change? What's your assessment?
So we're seeing, I mean, you're looking at the climate projections, everyone's expecting, we're hoping for about a 2-degree increase in temperature, but we're planning for a 4 degrees increase in temperature. And that starts to mean that the kind of thing we've just seen these last few months becomes more like the new normal. Drier in the spring and the summer, wetter also in the winter. So you have this problem of both too little rain and then too much. So the long-term strategy you mentioned, and by the way, thank you to everybody for the comments they made on the consultation, it's really helped us change that, is looking forward and saying, well, what do we need to do then to cope with a future where we have that drier and wetter weather? How do we as a nation plan for that? And that's what the strategy sets out.
Right, you're going to announce it this afternoon, but
that's right.
Come on, let us see behind the curtain. What is your strategy? What are you going to do?
Yeah, so I suppose just very briefly, we're seeing extreme weather new normal. We're seeing the fact that the population is shifting and growing. So a lot of movement from west of Scotland to east of Scotland, as well as population growing and new households forming. And we also know that a lot of our assets are coming to the end of their life. So we have fantastic assets, but many we're going to need to renew. We're at that phase, like, you know, if you own a house, every now and again you've got to replace the roof. We're at that point of our evolution. So those are the three things we're facing into. How do we cope with that? We've got to carry on innovating as Scottish Water, driving efficiency. We know we can collaborate more effectively with local authorities and others to kind of look at that new normal. How do we adjust to it? And we also know that we need to reduce that demand. So all of us in Scotland need to rethink our relationship with water. How do we use what we need, but no more? Make sure we only flush the 3 Ps down the loo. These are the kind of changes that
poo and
paper is the third one. Okay. Apologies on a Sunday morning for raising that. And if we can do all of those things, and I'm confident we can, you know, we've got a publicly owned water company in Scotland, it's all of our Scottish Water, we can all lean into this, then I think where can we get to over 25 years? We can get to a place where tap water remains a source of national pride, we carry on improving the quality of water in our rivers and seas, and we can carry on supporting economic and housing growth across Scotland as well.
I'm fascinated by all this, but we have a limited amount of time. Yeah. Let me focus the next questions, because I know that the infrastructure, right, you're saying some of it's getting quite old, we need to upgrade a lot of it. I read something recently that suggested that over the next 25 years from now, if we want to just have not improve anything, but have the same standard we have just now, it's going to cost £50 billion of infrastructure investment. That's a full year's budget for the Scottish Government. Where's that money going to come from?
So, first of all, it's worth saying that's if nothing else changes. So a lot of what's in the strategy says if we can make these changes, that bill can come right down. But let's be clear, we are going to need to carry on sustained investment in our water infrastructure over the years because of all the things I've just talked about. Now, bills have gone up in recent times. You know, that's an issue. Nobody ever wants to do that. We're going to try and make sure that bill increases are no more than they need to be, But what we've had in Scotland has been really helpful is a sustained level of investment. We haven't had a kind of roller coaster that we've seen elsewhere. So the aim will be to try and ensure we invest what we need, we keep it steady, manageable and affordable, but nonetheless we aren't skimping on the investment we need to do now, which would leave the next generation facing the consequences of underinvestment.
Okay, and then all the other stuff that we've got to do, the watching the use of our water and cutting back on the waste of our water. I was amazed to learn we use 40% more water per head of population in Scotland than they do in Yorkshire.
That's right.
Is that because they're on meters in Yorkshire?
I think there are all sorts of reasons behind that. I think it's partly there's a greater perception of the need to be careful with water and value it as a precious resource. We tend to think it's abundant, we don't need to worry about it. That's not the case. We're not immune to a changing climate.
So why not stick us on meters and charge us for what we use?
I think one of the things we are looking at, we're doing a pilot in Dundee to look at monitoring people's use, not charging by the meter, but showing people what they're using. We think if we can understand what we're using in our households, and indeed if we can understand the Scottish Water, what people are using, that really helps to think about what we're using, manage leakage more effectively as well, and make that sort of shift in this kind of valuing of water as a scarce and precious
Where are you
resource.
going to put? Where does the meter go in the house? In a
The meters go into the housing in the same way that you'd see with an energy meter or something.
which you never look at, really.
Well, but you can do it these days. You can have smart meters that mean you can see it on your phone. So I have a.
But where's the jeopardy? I mean, you're not going to. Why don't you charge us?
Well, because I think there's an issue there about what's the fairest way of charging. At the moment, we charge through the council tax, and that allows there to be a kind of an approach that means people know what they're paying. There is a difficulty about moving to charging by volume. Monitoring, I think, is a good first step.
But there is this disparity, right? We use 40% more water and we need to use less.
Yep.
Surely there has to be a stick at some point, doesn't there?
Well, I think at the moment, one of the things I would call out is that when we put out all the news about the fact that we were in a very dry spring and we asked people to use less, we got a wonderful response. So people have actually reduced the usage. We saw 60 million litres reduction. Particularly, I think people recognising you just don't need to put a hose in your garden, you don't need to sprinkle it, you can actually use watering cans. That makes such a difference. So, you know, I think we're looking more at carrots than sticks.
Right, let me ask you this. Sir Tom Hunter was in that chair last week saying, look, we've got a massive housing crisis, we need to build, baby, build. He said we need to cut through the red tape, councils across the country, and it's not just him. So many of our guests have said we really need to increase our housing stock. If we do that, if we build tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of houses across this country, can you supply them all?
So I think, firstly, I agree. We need way more houses in this country. There's a housing crisis in many parts of Scotland, and we stand ready to support that housing need coming through. So we need to plan for it. Again, that's part of what's in this 25-year strategy. It says we expect there to be housing growth and that population shift. We know if we can plan ahead and we can invest properly, we can support sustainable housing growth. But one other thing, in those new houses, we can plan for those so they don't need to use as much water as traditional houses. There's all sorts of things you can do that drive a more water efficient home if you're building it afresh. OK,
another headache perhaps about to cross your desk, the threat of strike action. Your staff are not happy. You've offered them a 3.4% pay increase. They say that their colleagues elsewhere in the country get far more. Is there going to be a strike? So I really hope not. I'm really pleased that our unions have put the latest offer to a ballot of their members. It's above inflation. And in fact, if we look back over the longer period of time, Scottish Water employees have had more than inflation increases over the last 10 years or so. Awkward for you when you take home almost £500,000 a year, isn't it? So, of course, the board set my salary. That's an issue that they determine. I mean, we're looking at, is this a fair deal for our people? I believe it is. I say it's above inflation. It also means that those on the lowest incomes get the highest increases from that pay deal, were it to be accepted. People should have that pay in their pockets now. We've been running this for 11 months. It's time to put it behind us and focus on what we all are here to do at Scottish Water, which is to look after the people of Scotland. All right, we will leave it there. Alex Plant, listen, really interesting stuff. Good to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Remember, debate night, Wednesday nights. They are doing a special in the Hamilton by-election this week. Get across that. Stephen Jardine and the team. If you want to be on their audience, look up their webpage online. You can find out how to do it there. I'm leaving you for now. We'll be back same time, same place next week. If you're with us on the radio, stay tuned. Here's Lucy.